You feel the air trapped in your lungs. The person in front of you smiles, but the smile brings no relief. The touch that should feel tender burns like cold fire on your skin. The voice that should soothe you echoes heavy, as if carrying invisible chains. It is in this moment that doubt tears through your mind. If love is meant to be a refuge, why does it feel like a prison? Sigmund Freud once said the unconscious is the one who truly chooses your desires, not you. It is the one guiding your steps in silence, without asking permission, leading you straight toward the one who wounds you the most. You feel the contradiction, a tightness in your chest, an irresistible pull, a pain stubbornly disguising itself as affection. And the question remains, like a haunting whisper that refuses to fade. Why do you keep desiring the one who should be your greatest threat? You believe you decide for yourself, that every choice in love is born from what you feel in the moment. But Freud said something disturbing. Before you even think, there is already a force within you that is chosen in advance. That force is the unconscious. It does not speak out loud. It does not appear in clear dialogues. It acts in silence, like a director hidden behind the curtains, guiding every gesture, every approach, every passion that feels inexplicable. And the most unsettling part is that you only notice it when you're already in too deep. Freud explained that your mind is not a single, transparent place. There is the conscious part, what you can name. But just beneath it lies a deeper region, filled with memories, forbidden desires, and old wounds you prefer to forget. And still, it is from this hidden place that the impulses driving your love life emerge. That is why, so often, you find yourself saying, "I cannot explain it, I just felt it." This, "I just felt it," is not simple. It is the unconscious speaking. It is what decides why a glance holds you, why a single word echoes louder than it should, why one particular person ignites a fire you cannot put out. Think of how many times you felt drawn to someone that made no sense to your reason. Someone who did not fit your plans, who brought more chaos than stability. And yet, you dove in. Freud said it is no coincidence. It is the unconscious pulling you back to unresolved stories. This hidden mind is guided by emptiness. Every absence you lived, every gesture of affection you longed for and never received, every rejection that scarred your childhood, all of it remains recorded, not as a clear memory, but as marks. And those marks create an invisible map, always pointing you toward people who, in some way, resemble those wounds. You do not choose. You simply follow the path that was already drawn. Freud said, "The ego is not the master in its own house." You believe you govern your affections, but the truth is you only inhabit the living room, while in the basements and shadowed corridors other forces have already decided your fate. It is like walking into a burning house believing it was your choice, when, in reality, someone had lit the match long before you opened the door. And it is at this point that a revelation begins to surface. If the unconscious moves you in silence, is it not unsettling to think that the love you sought so desperately might only be the repetition of an old absence? This is the very space where Freud forces us to face an uncomfortable mirror. You think you love because you wanna, but perhaps you love because you need to complete something left unfinished. And when you realize this, a new doubt rises like a shadow. Is your love story truly about the other? Or is it only the reflection of the invisible scars you have carried all along? It all begins far too early. Before you even knew what love was, you had already learned how to feel its absence. Sigmund Freud said it is in childhood that the invisible foundations are laid for everything you will later call affection. They are not clear memories you can recount in detail. They are impressions, silent marks, etched into layers so deep they continue to operate long after you have become an adult. Think of the child who reaches out their arms and is not embraced, of that gaze begging for recognition, only to meet silence, or the affection that arrives late, incomplete, full of conditions. These experiences do not disappear with time. They remain hidden, like wounds that heal on the surface but stay open within. And one day, without noticing, you begin to call love precisely that which repeats this pain. Freud said the unconscious keeps every gesture, every lack, every shadow of childhood. And when you grow up, You are not only searching for someone to love, you are searching, without knowing it, for someone who will make you relive what was left unfinished. Is it not strange that, when you fall for someone who does not value you, you feel at once both pain and hope? Pain, because you relive the abandonment. Hope, because you believe that this time it might finally be different. That is the paradox. You do not only seek the presence of another, you seek to repair an ancient absence. It is as if, by winning over the one who does not value you, you could finally prove to your inner child that you are worthy of love. But in practice, that almost never happens. The wound opens again, and you find yourself trapped in the same cycle that began years ago. Freud revealed this in his studies on the Oedipus complex, not only in the literal sense of the theory. The essence lies in understanding that the very first bonds with those who cared for you, or fail to care for you, become the unconscious mold for all future relationships. If there was rejection, the unconscious learns to confuse love with absence. If there was abandonment, it learns to confuse desire with struggle. And every person you meet afterwards carries, for you, the weight of someone from the past. Have you ever felt as if you were standing before someone new, yet at the same time strangely familiar? It is the echo of old figures blending into their image. The heart believes it is destiny. Freud would say it is repetition. And the most disturbing part is that this process does not happen rationally. There is no conscious choice, no logical evaluation. There is only the invisible force of the unconscious, guiding you toward faces that, in some way, resemble your earliest marks. And without realizing it, you keep trying to mend a story that ended long ago, but still lives on inside you. These marks are not small. They are like long shadows stretching across time. You think you are loving someone in the present, but, deep down, you are speaking with the past, with that embrace that never came, with that word that was never spoken, with that gaze that never lingered on you. And when passion hurts, it is precisely that pain that reveals the truth. What wounds you today is only the reflection of what wounded you before. In the next step, you will see how Freud showed that this link between pleasure and pain is no accident, but a powerful inner movement, capable of binding you in ties that burn and fascinate at the same time. Have you noticed how the heart races precisely in front of the one who should inspire caution? It is as if a dangerous flame burns brighter the closer you get to what can hurt you. Sigmund Freud described this contradiction in two invisible forces that live within every human being: the life drive and the death drive. The life drive is the desire to unite, to create, to preserve, to feel pleasure. It is what seeks the warmth of an embrace, the intimacy of closeness, the comfort of safety. But beside it lies the death drive, a silent energy that pushes toward destruction, toward returning to the void, toward repeating pain until the very edge. In love, these two forces never appear separately. They intertwine, and it is in this quiet entanglement that the paradox arises. What wounds can, at the same time, feel irresistible, not because you enjoy the pain itself, but because the unconscious has learned to tie pleasure and suffering together, as if they were part of the same gesture. You feel the excitement of the encounter, but with it, the fear of losing. You feel the warmth of affection, but right after, the sting of demands, of absence, of rejection. And still, you cannot let go. It is like biting into a sweet fruit that hides poison. The taste draws you in, but it is the poison that keeps you dependent. Freud said that when the drives intertwine, love becomes the stage of a secret war. On one side, the genuine desire for life, for union, for tenderness. On the other, the compulsion to repeat pain, the unconscious attempt to relive what was never resolved. And it is in this battlefield that the heart insists on beating harder precisely for the one who destroys your peace the most. Perhaps you have felt this, that blend of anxiety and desire, where every message received lights a fire, but every silence shatters your stability. The same person who offers a touch that warms you is the one who robs you of your sleep. And still, it is them you think of, the one you cannot detach from. Freud saw in this repetition the unconscious trying to give meaning to what was left unfinished, as if inside you there were a blind impulse whispering, "This time will be different. but it rarely is. Most of the time, it is the same pain dressed in a new disguise. This mixture of pleasure and pain is not merely an emotional accident. It is an invisible programming, built by inner forces you cannot control. That is why what wounds you also attracts you. What suffocates also calls to you. What destroys also keeps you bound. And perhaps this is the greatest enigma of love through Freud's lens. The human heart, so often, beats stronger not in front of what brings peace, but in front of what threatens to tear it away. You like to believe you are in charge. You analyze, compare, decide. You think you choose a partner for the look, the conversation, the character. But Freud said something that dismantles this illusion. The unconscious had already chosen long before you noticed. It is as if there were an invisible force, always a few steps ahead, pulling the strings of your attraction. And you, without realizing it, only build the justifications afterward. It's because he understands me. It's because she completes me. Deep down, these reasons are only the mask of a desire born in silence, guided by hidden memories and marks. Imagine a child walking through a street market. They do not choose the most nutritious candy or the cheapest. Their eyes light up for the one that recalls the taste of childhood, the smell of a happy moment. Something similar happens to you in love. Reason believes it is deciding, but the one pointing the finger, the one truly choosing, is the unconscious. And the most unsettling moment is when you find yourself drawn to someone who does not match what you said you wanted. The mental list that seems so clear, respect, care, partnership, vanishes in front of a face that awakens something inexplicable. It is then that you hear yourself saying, "I do not know why I like this person so much, but I do." That confession is the purest trace of the unconscious at work. Freud said the ego is only the facade of a house where the true owners live out of sight. While you stroll through the rooms believing you are in control, the deepest decisions have already been made in the basement. And you only realize it when you're already in too deep, when you already miss someone, even knowing you should keep your distance. This is the trap of false choice, believing you govern, when, in truth, you only justify. The heart leans toward those who touch old wounds, and you call it fate. The mind tries to find logic, but only invents stories to cover the secret movement that was already written inside you. Have you checked whether you are subscribed to this channel? If not, you may miss truths that change everything. Also, leave a like. It is what helps this video reach others trapped in the same cycles you are learning to see. And stay with me, because what comes next will reveal even deeper layers of what Freud himself called the shadows of love. You try to convince yourself that you have learned the lesson. You promise yourself that next time will be different, that you will not repeat the same mistake, that you will not be deceived again by someone who wounds you. But before you know it, you are standing in front of someone with the same look, the same pattern, the same pain disguised in another face. Sigmund Freud called this the return of the repressed. Everything you try to bury does not disappear. It only hides for a while, until it finds a way to return. And in love, this return is cruel. The more you run from certain stories, the stronger they appear. It is like trying to push a ball underwater. For a few moments, you succeed. But the more force you use to hold it down, the more violent its leap when it breaks free. That is how it works with the feelings, memories, and desires you try to erase. They come back with intensity, and almost always return in the form of a new relationship that looks different, but carries the same poison. Perhaps you have lived this, you in a toxic relationship, and when you believe you have found someone completely different, you discover the same signs, the same games, the same wounds. It is not coincidence. It is the unconscious carving a path for what was repressed to rise again. Freud said the unconscious does not accept silence. What has not been worked through demands a stage. What was hidden insists on returning. And in love, this silent demand is expressed in the bonds you choose, or rather, in the bonds that choose you. Each time a pattern returns, it is not just bad luck. It is the repetition of something your mind tried to forget, but could not heal. And until that cycle is recognized, you will keep being drawn to the same figures, as if pushed by an invisible force. It is disturbing to realize this. The stories you never resolve continue to demand a voice through the people you meet. And the face that attracts you today may only be the new mask of an old wound. There's a silent moment when you realize you're living the same story all over again. The setting changes, the faces change, but the feeling is identical. It is like walking into a new room and still recognizing the smell, the temperature, even the faint sounds in the background. Freud called this the compulsion to repeat, the unconscious tendency to always seek what is already familiar, even if it is painful, even if it slowly destroys you. The familiar has a strange power. As much as it brings suffering, it offers a deceptive sense of safety. You already know how it works, you already know the terrain, you can already predict the wounds. And because of that, the known seems less threatening than the emptiness of solitude or the uncertainty of something new. That is why so often you remain in ties that suffocate. You accept heavy silences. You accept the weight of indifference. You accept crumbs of affection. Because, deep down, there is something frightening about letting go. The pain you know feels more bearable than the fear of having nothing. Think of someone who has lived for years in a dark house. When they finally open the door to the light, their eyes ache. The brightness stings, causes dizziness, awakens the urge to go back into the shadows. Not because the darkness is good, but because it is familiar. The same happens in love. You choose the shadow because it once kept you company. Freud showed that this movement is not conscious. You do not wake up saying, "Today I will repeat the pain." But when you sense the familiar smell of an old pattern, something inside you leans forward, as if whispering, "I've been here before. Here I know how to survive." And that false comfort is the poison. The familiar creates the illusion of control. You think you can endure it because you know the paths. But in truth, you are only feeding the same wound. And while you do not see it, you keep mistaking repetition for destiny. Is it not strange to think that, at times, you would rather endure a relationship that suffocates than face the silence of your own company? There comes a moment when the air feels lighter. You look at the same scene as always, but suddenly you see something different. It is as if the fog that once covered your eyes is torn apart in an instant. The voice that once seemed sweet now sounds harsh. The gesture that once looked like affection now reveals itself as control. The gaze that once held you now feels heavy. Sigmund Freud said that liberation begins when the unconscious becomes conscious. As long as you do not see it, you remain a prisoner, walking in circles, believing you are choosing, when in truth you are only repeating. But the moment you recognize the pattern, the cycle loses its strength. Perhaps you have lived this, that inner snap that changes everything. A small detail, a phrase, a silence, a gesture that acts like a trigger. Suddenly, you realize it was never love holding the relationship together. It was only the shadow of an old story being replayed. This awareness does not arrive without pain. It is like turning on the light in a room where you had long grown used to the dark. Your eyes burn, the brightness unsettles you, but the truth stands firm. You begin to see what was always there. It was not affection, it was repetition. It was not destiny, it was a wound. And in that instant, a new responsibility also arises. Because once you see, you can no longer pretend you do not know. The unconscious has revealed its script, and now it is you who decides whether to keep acting it out or break it. Freud reminded us that awareness does not erase the marks, but it offers the chance to choose differently. It is like standing before a door you have crossed 1,000 times without noticing. This time, you see the handle, you recognize the path, and you can choose not to go in. What was the moment when you realized you are not being loved, but only repeating an old story? That question is not light, but it is the seed of freedom. Because from the instant you see, you can never go back to being blind. Imagine someone walking every night down the same dark street. The wind blows cold, the lights are scarce, and each step echoes like a ritual that never changes. At the end of this street, there is always a closed door. The person arrives before it, grasps the handle, tries to turn it, but the door will not open. And still, night after night, they return. This movement seems senseless. Why insist on a path that only leads to frustration? But Freud explained, the unconscious repeats what has not been resolved. The person is not seeking the door itself. They are unconsciously seeking the feeling of finally opening it, of proving that this time will be different. Each night, the same scene. The same expectation, the same disappointment. Until, in a sudden moment of clarity, something shifts. The person notices a sliver of light at the side. Another door, discreet, almost invisible, had always been there. But the fixation on the first had kept them from seeing it. This is the moment of awareness. It is not that the open door suddenly appeared. It had always existed. What changes is the gaze. The person finally sees what was hidden, and for the first time has a real choice: to keep forcing the locked door or to walk through the one that invites freedom. In love, the same thing happens. You insist on people who will not open, on relationships that will not bloom, on stories that have already proven to be repetitions of pain. And still, you return, because the hope of repairing the past keeps you trapped in front of the same door. But when the unconscious becomes conscious, something within you begins to see. Perhaps the way out was always there, only concealed by the habit of repeating. Freud said the path to healing is not erasing the past, but illuminating what was hidden. It is in that instant that the dark street reveals new possibilities. And you understand that you can choose to cross a new door, not because someone opened it for you, but because, at last, you were able to see it. Now you understand why Freud said the ego is not master in its own house. The desires that seemed like free choices were, in truth, old voices repeating stories you never resolved. The love that binds you to pain is no accident. It is the unconscious recreating patterns, forcing you to perform, once again, the same play. But the difference begins when you see. When the fog breaks, what once looked like destiny reveals itself as repetition. And from that moment, the chance for true choice is born. It is not an easy path, but it is the only one that sets you free. This channel exists to illuminate what was hidden, to reveal the invisible cycles that imprison you, and to bring you the awareness that cuts the chains. If this video brought you clarity, share it with someone who also needs to see. Check if you're already subscribed and leave your like. That is what keeps this message alive and helps it reach others who are still walking in the dark. We will meet again in the shadows of the next hidden truth.